Today I speak with Jake Wolki. He's the founder and owner of Wolki Farm and Butchery. It's doing some fantastic things in Albury, New South Wales. We generally talk about regenerative agriculture and many concepts within that, and particularly the 5 pillars of the Wolki Farm, being animal welfare, environmental backbone, healing food, building community, and profit. This is definitely an interesting podcast for those of you interested in regenerative agriculture and farming and homesteading overall. And of course, this podcast is brought to you by Vital Origin, Australia's best and most ethical animal-based company, helping you reintroduce nature's original superfoods back into your diet. And to all of our listeners, you can get 10% off at checkout by using the discount code SOURCE10. You can support the channel by liking and subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. All right, into our talk with Jake Wolki. Well, Jake, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I think a lot of people in our space are probably familiar with you and what you're doing. You know, you're a big proponent in the regenerative agriculture space, and I definitely want to dive into that a lot. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that we're going to go into. But before going down that path, I think it's always good for our listeners to learn a little bit more about our guests. And so I'd love to learn more about you, your background, you know, your farm, and then we can kind of dive into what you're doing in the bigger space within agriculture.
Yeah, sure. Well, when I give keynote presentations, the opening slide is a little bit about me, and it's interesting, you know, every time I open a presentation to give it a touch up for the next time I present it, I keep changing things on it because, you know, who you are changes, right? So at the moment, when I open that first slide, it says homeschooler, it says raw milk enthusiast,
Excellent.
Bitcoiner.
Yeah, love it.
Nguni advocate, which is the breed of cattle that we're championing on our farm.
I once asked about that.
You know, they're probably the 4 biggest labels that I like. Free market capitalist. You know, that sort of goes in with the whole Bitcoiner thing, though, doesn't it? So, you know, I grew up here in Albury, New South Wales. Just did normal school life. My family's been in bricks and mortar retail since my grandpa came here from Germany 65 years ago. And I grew up just wanting to do that. I just wanted to sell. I was a little kid. I used to sit under the counter and listen to Dad haggle with reps and sell merchandise to customers. I was 4 or 5, and I used to set up cardboard boxes out the front of the street and drum and sing and have my hat out, and I was busking. And
nice.
Then I went up to making bookmarks. I used to draw bookmarks and sell them. And I remember figuring out one day that my little sister, who's 4 years younger, sold them a lot better than I did. So really, my sister was my first employee because she tried to copy me one day. I must have been 8 or 9, so she's 4 or 5. And she's gone up to a customer. She's gone, "Oh, would you like one of my homemade bookmarks? They're $3 each or 2 for $6." And no one could say no for 2 for $6 because it was so hilariously gorgeous. So that was when I changed from, you know, hustler to employer. You know, I've done heaps of weird and wacky business things, but in 2019 my life took a bit of a turn for the better because I've always been I wouldn't say a sickly child, but I've always dealt with stuff. I've always had eczema, rashes, dermatitis. I remember the doctors told me I was allergic to nickel, I was allergic to sweat, I was allergic to hair, I was allergic to dust, I was allergic to all this stuff. And I used to get desensitization immunizations. We'd be road tripping down to Melbourne every month to get those shots. Did that for years. In 2019, when I went on this whole food healing health journey, I was seeing a doctor here at the local clinic for my scripts every few months. And I went in and I sort of had a bit of a mega whinge to her. And I said, if you can't fix what I'm going through, I'm at the point where I'm just going to sell up shop and move to the coast, because I always knew when I was at the coast, my symptoms were better. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole, because I never really thought why. I just, you know, you got time off from work, you're exercising more, you're outside, you're in the ocean, you know, but the fresh air, the sunlight hours, but none of this ever sort of clicked with me. I just knew I was better by the coast. And I had a few local businesses at the time. I must have had about 40 staff working for me in my bike shop and my restaurant. And I was ready to throw the towel in and move. And so she's turned the dial up on my script. So I was on a script, eye drop, nasal spray, and tablet to suppress my seasonal allergies that I seem to have 3 out of 4 seasons of the year.
Yeah, of course.
You know, here at Albury, New South Wales, there's a lot of monoculture cropping north of here, especially canola. And I can just about tell you the day that the canola flowers start blooming because it just kills me. And Albury's in a big valley, so all the particulate that comes down in the atmosphere sort of really settles on us. We got plane trees and all these other horrible plants that killed me. And so I actually begged her for the steroid shot, because I'd had friends that had had a good experience with the steroid shot boosting or destroying their immune system, depends how you want to look at it, and then them not reacting anymore. And to her credit, she was a very conventional doctor, but she said, no, you're young and healthy, and it thins your bones, and there's side effects, and I don't think it's worth it. But she turned up the dial on all my other scripts, and I went and cashed them in straight away. And the nasal spray, I grabbed it and gave it a shake and a pump. And before I left the chemist, both my nostrils, started pouring out blood like a tap. This nose spray had just done something in me. And I just went home, and I was newly married. I think our firstborn was born that year or the year after, something like that. And I just said to my wife, like, this sucks. And she basically said to me, are you ready to start eating healthy? I've always been a bit heavy. I've always eaten heaps of junk food. My wife's a real fitness freak, and she's always tried to do the best with healthy eating. With the information we had at the time. And so it was no more iced coffees for breakfast. It was no more KFC and satay noodle box for lunch. It was no more all this junk. And we just went down this mad rabbit hole, and it got to the point that I became so fanatical about it that I wanted a very specific meat product. I wanted red meat from grass-fed and finished animals that had never been medicated, on completely organic pastures, never drenched, which is wormed for people listening. I wanted meat from animals that had never been wormed, and that's a rabbit hole I'm very happy to go down.
Yeah, I'm sure we can dive into that.
I couldn't find that meat anywhere, Richard. I went to the farmers markets, and they drenched and they set stock. So it was a grass-finished product, but it was a set stock product. I went to the butchers, and no one knew where anything came from. And then the further I got into it, the worse it was. And it got to the point where I said to my wife, we're just going to do it ourselves. My dad had a 100-acre hobby block just out of town, so I leased a bit of land, and I got some cattle and chickens. And when we processed our first body of beef, I guilt-tripped all friends and family into buying a bit to sort of ease the burden. And we got really good feedback, and people wanted more and more. And here we are 5 years later, and we've got a butchery here at Albury Wodonga with 2 full-time butchers. We're shipping a pallet's worth of meat. We're shipping half a ton of meat a week out to just about every state and territory in Australia. We've got all these value adds. We're farming beef, pork, chicken, lamb, eggs, the whole thing. We've got a house cow, so my raw milk enthusiasm is at an all-time high.
Yeah, I've been seeing some of that, seeing that on socials. Yep.
So there's a bit of a bio about how we got to where we are and sort of where we're at the moment.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. And I think, like many people we talk to, and even, we've had doctors, and I'm sure, like Max and Anthony and many others that often have their own story, which is why they end up going down that path. And, they go down the medical and health side of things. But it's nice to know that we have people like yourself going down the food production side of things, because really it starts from there, which you've obviously figured out, right? Is having good quality food is sort of the forefront of what we need to be pushing. And ideally, a meat-based diet that's free from all the garbage that we see in the world nowadays. I think it helps that you have obviously quite a broad business background. And that's certainly something I want to get into, because, farming and agriculture, especially in the younger generations now, is sort of a dying practice. And especially it seems that people in the conventional farming space seem to think that regenerative agriculture and the way that you're practicing things is it's not very efficient, and it's not a good way to drive profit. I think that's something we can touch on the end. Maybe a good starting point is looking at your Wolki 5 pillars, because I think that kind of covers everything that we want to talk about quite broadly. And there's a lot of different avenues we can go into. I'm definitely interested in talking about the worming and that side of things as well. I'll let you sort of roll off on where you think is the most appropriate sort of starting point within your 5 pillars.
Well, I can build the worming into the story about our 5 pillars, but I think all good systems or anecdotes or policies are formed organically. I think if you sit down and you go, rightio, we're going to force out a management system for our farm that achieves this and this, I just think that those things are contrived and hard, and they're always going to need updating, which is fine. I'm not against constant revisions and iterations, but our 5 pillars of production, I can't really draw a line as to where it came from, but I know it just came from working on the farm with my staff and problems would come up on the farm. You know, the cattle got out, or we lease a lot of properties around the place, and quite a few of those properties don't have phone reception. So if a staff member goes there to do something and there's a animal in the wrong spot, or an injured animal, or they've run out of feed, or the truck breaks down, or whatever, they need to be able to make decisions that are in line with the business's values without running back to reception and calling me. And so we just came up with, I guess, a bit of a triage process of what's the most important consideration first, and what's the secondary. So the 5 pillars of production is what we came up with, and I call it a flywheel because I really believe if you hone and honor all 5 pillars, the whole system that is adhering to that starts to build momentum, and it keeps on gaining that momentum as you go forward. So pillar number 1 for us is animal welfare. And so that's always the first consideration. If we're at a farm and there's a distressed animal, you know, you don't go and put diesel in the tractor. You deal with the animal, of course, right? But it's more than that. It also means that your decision making needs to be really taking in the natural expression and the historical context of that animal. So what I mean by that is, we'll take pigs for example. Pigs are an animal that belong outside in nature, where pigs are in their natural environment. There's no sheds. There is lots of shade. They're a forest-dwelling animal, but they're omnivorous, and they're social, and they like to wallow. And the groups they hang out with have mixed ages and mixed sexes, and all these different things we can glean. And if we look at factory farming today, when they farrow down piglets in a sow stall in a shed on concrete floors, the first thing they do with these piglets is they grab them and give them iron injections. Now, you've never heard about a free-range pig farmer giving a piglet an iron injection, because the piglet will be 15 minutes old and it'll have its nose in the dirt sucking up iron. And so that's an example of, if you're honouring the animal's natural expression, you know, in context to where it came from and where it is now, I think that's the highest form of welfare. And you can already see that the needs for these medical interventions starting to fall away. So another example of welfare for me would be letting ruminants like cattle and sheep have fast paddock transitions on your farm. So we endeavour to move our animals daily on our farms, because they poop in the paddock and they wee in the water. So we fence off all riparian areas, and we move the cattle from pasture to pasture every day or every couple of days. And because they're always moving, they're always leaving their excrement behind. So any worms that they might have in their system, which everything has worms, we've got different worms and bacteria and things in our stomachs that aren't always what we want, but they're excreting it and they're not grazing around it, so they're not ingesting more eggs and more specimens, and the worm pressure isn't getting high. So I don't say, I don't want you to worm your animals, and then by proxy your animals get really wormy and sick and you refuse to worm them because you're dogmatic. What the inference is your farm management systems should be sophisticated enough to honour the animal's natural expression, that it doesn't need to be wormed, because in nature it's not a problem. So that's the welfare of the animal. That's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is our environmental backbone. And really, you know, we want to be doing things on our farm that enhance the commons, being soil quality and life, water cleanliness and life, air quality, all these sorts of things. And it's really simple. We don't use any of the sides. We don't use pesticide. We don't use herbicide. We try our best not to do homicide and fratricide. You know, we try to get along with each other well on our farm. So there's no Latin killings on our properties. But really, all you need to do is honour that natural expression of the animal, and your environmental backbone is going to fall in as a byproduct of that, because, you know, nature thrives without chemical interventions. It's on a different time scale. So we will look at nature and it can heal itself, but it can take thousands of years. So we can take these natural principles and speed things up by you know, applying our brain with these sort of natural principles. So we want to work with our environment. And the reason I call it environmental backbone is it's not always nice to do the jobs you need to do. You got to move the cows every day, and some days it's pouring down rain and it's cold and you don't want to go outside, but you got to grow a pair, you got to put on your dryzer bone, you got to go out and move your animals. That's your obligation as a farmer. Pillar number 3 is we want to create healing food. Just about every single customer that finds us is on a food healing journey. every now and then we will have somebody email back feedback or send me a phone call or a text message or something and go, the meat had too much fat on it, or, this cut was too thick, or what it was. And, we're always happy to take feedback on the chin. I've been in customer service for 20 years. But at the same time, if I get feedback like there's too much fat on it, I know straight away that these are not our people, and that's okay. We don't need to appeal to the Coles and Woolies big box customers. We're trying to appeal to people that understand that food's more than a vehicle to make your belly full. It's your input to help your body thrive and achieve maximum health. So pillar number 3 is we want to create healing foods, but healing food is, again, a byproduct of animal welfare, being taking animals' natural expression in consideration, and then running an organic farm, a chemical-free, environmentally friendly farm. If you do those two things, the healing food that we're all looking for is a byproduct. We're not doing anything really special to create that. Step number 4 is we want to build community. So having our events, doing our farm tours, being transparent on social media. I get a lot of praise. I get a lot of mockery. And that's okay. We wear our heart.
You have to take both, unfortunately.
We share our wins and I share the losses. And that's okay. So we want to build community, and that's step number 4. And step number 5 is we want to create a profit. We need to be profitable. We can't reinvest in more animals, more land, more infrastructure, more sophisticated websites or emailing lists or any of these sorts of things to try to reach the people that we're trying to reach. Without making money. And I'd love to make heaps of money because I love the stuff. Every problem I have in my life could be fixed by money. So
and money is often a value proposition, right? If you're providing value to people and you're doing something worthwhile, people will put money towards it. So usually the more good you do in the world, the more value you bring to the world, and that comes off as money. I think often people sometimes have a misperceived view of money being evil, but I think that often comes down to people's underlying values and their integrity of what they do with it. But I definitely want to get into that. And I'm curious, so before, this whole venture, obviously you're in business, did you have much experience on the farm before? Was there a family farm? How did you sort of jump full foot into it?
So when my grandpa came to Australia when he was 19, he was a fitter and turner, so a tradesman, and he worked around a few different jobs. He was in South Australia, worked in a few car factories and different things, and ended up doing some sharecropping, so growing a few butternut pumpkins. He had no experience in that. It was just something he picked up, driving a tractor and doing a bit of share farming. And then he got into a little piggery and started running. He was South Australia's fastest growing piggery. I think he started with 2 or 3 sows, and he was feeding them. He was the first guy to feed pellets. Everyone else was still swill feeding leftovers from restaurants and delis and things. And the reason he did that was he didn't have time to go around and pick up all the green waste like everyone else, because he was still working a full-time job. So he'd work a bit of extra overtime every week to buy the pellets to feed the pigs. And he ended up selling that piggery. I think he got up to something like 80 sows, which is a bit, you're cranking out a couple thousand pigs a year, depending on how you're running the place at that stage. And in sheds, indoor, outdoor sort of set runs. And he looks at my pigs in the paddock now. He's still with us, and he's very involved in what we do. And he's 86 now, and he'll look in the paddocks, and he says to me every time he sees my pigs, he goes, "Jake, I don't know why we didn't think of this. It never crossed our minds to put the pigs outside and move them around like the dairy farmers did with their dairy cows." He used to get up from his piggery and go help the dairy cows get milked next door in the morning for some extra cash flow. And he never thought about doing with the cows what they do with the pigs, And this is just the reality of the status quo that we're in across the board with, with everything we do as a species. But apart from that, he packed up all those businesses and moved here to get into fast food. Essentially, he bought a fast food rotisserie barbecue chicken business here in Albury. He left all those farming ventures behind when my father was 6 or 7 years old, and so I grew up a little bit. My father bought that 100-acre property. Well, my parents did. My parents are still together. And I moved there when I was 14, 15, spent a couple of years there before I got into town. So that was really, I didn't do much. Every now and then my dad would ask me to help him with the cattle, and I'd roll my eyes and not want to be involved so much.
Yeah.
And, you can't lead a horse to water. And it definitely wasn't a family passion that I picked up.
Yeah, interesting. So it was really the health shift that really drove you towards that? And it's more kudos to you because, jumping into farming feet first or head first is a big endeavor. And it seems like you've come across a lot of the thinking that's really moving the field forward now, which is surprising because, as you said, the status quo is very against that. And I always laugh because it seems counterintuitive. And I guess it's maybe, our major hubris as humans. We think we know better than, excuse me, we know better than nature. And so we change the way that animals, naturally form their systems in their ecosystems, and we change it to this conventional farming. And like you outlined, when we move them back to what nature intended and we look at their evolutionary background, it gives a very clear picture of how animals are supposed to be raised across nature, and then we can apply that in farming. So if we do that, makes a big difference. But it seems there's a lot of resistance to that still, and whether it's because it is the status quo and it's deep ingrained, I'm not sure. Maybe you have more insights into that. But yeah, I think that's the premise. And we see parallels with that in human health as well, right? Like now there's this push, and we're very big on the ancestral health movement, which is really the narrative of we need to consider our ancestral past, our evolutionary past, and then consider that into how we shape our environment for humans. And then, ideally we have much better health when we align those things. And it's the same thing for animals. I think in some areas we're probably better with animals than we are with humans. I think we still got a long way to go from that perspective, but it's great to see that shift now happening in the agricultural space. And so I think you've pointed out a couple things. What does that look like in a little bit more detail for those who are not super familiar with regenerative agriculture, and a few of the things that you said of between moving them through paddocks and having them graze in different areas? How does that play a role, and what are the important aspects of that, both for the animals and for the environment?
A few of the basic principles that we need to do on the farm to keep productivity up and keep animals healthy and etc. is mimicking those natural movements. So these animals are not sedentary in the wild. The ruminants move a lot, and they're always on the march with their migratory patterns. The birds are doing the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. So we move our ruminants, whether it's our cattle and our sheep, very often, very quickly around the farm. The chickens are in portable shelters on trailers, and they're getting towed around to new paddocks every couple of weeks, a couple of times a week. We try to keep them behind the cattle. Doesn't always work because the farms I've got my chickens on are on floodplains, so that often, doesn't end well. But that would be the ideal. If we could have the flocks of birds following the ruminant migrations, that'd be a beautiful thing. The pigs are moved weekly, but for us, it's just about observing those natural systems. And a lot of this stuff's been, pioneered long before we've come along. You've got, Joel Salatin of Polyface Farm in America popularized a lot of these concepts, again, in, this sort of modern era. But if you go back hundreds of years, this is all knowledge we knew. We didn't have the antibiotics. We didn't have the worming agents. We only had our management. And these were principles that were status quo back then.
Yeah. I think that's something that a lot of people still don't quite realize is when the system functions properly, you're going to have healthier animals, which then don't need all the antibiotics, don't need all the worming, but also the environment itself. You're not going to need all the herbicides, pesticides, like you said. So when the system functions as nature intended, we usually have less of that input, which is what we should be shooting for, because a lot of those things end up having quite significant detriments, both on the health of the animals, but then also ourselves, because we end up ingesting both the crops and the animals for those who are still eating some plant foods.
So one of the common whataboutisms from an astute listener would be, if you can do this with these animals and get away from all these inputs, how come not everybody does it? Because you save money.
That's always a question.
Yeah. And the reality is we do save all the inputs and we replace it with one very expensive and hard to find thing, and that's labor. So our models are definitely at the moment more expensive, especially at the scale that we're at, to execute, and a bit more complicated than just your typical, set stock and drench them once a year or whatever it might be. The beautiful thing is that these scale quite well. So the amount of time it takes to move 20 cows into a new paddock is almost identical to the amount of time it takes to move 100, which isn't much different from time it takes to move 500. So, we started with 20 cows and we've got about maybe 140 at the moment. And it's a beautiful thing to watch to sort of lean into that a little bit.
Yeah, fantastic. There's all the other aspects too, or I think again, this is where our time horizons are very short and we're very short-minded in general. We think convenience, quick wins. But if you have, all your animals end up getting sick because of the way that they're living, then there's long-term consequences of that if you end up having to cull entire groups of them. There's also the aspect now with the soil and degradation of the soil. So, if you don't have grazing animals that aren't replenishing the soil, and all we do is have monocrop agriculture everywhere, we already know that we have I think maybe a couple generations left of topsoil in certain areas in the world now, and it's all being depleted. And so when you actually expand your time horizon, like you said, to much longer times, then we start to see that this model is probably much more sustainable and scalable. Because if we just till and keep a bunch of animals in tight corridors, we're already seeing now growing issues. Obviously, there's for a long time been a lot of issues with diseases in cattle. We've got the so-called bird flu issue going around at the moment. But a lot of this is often due to poor practices of managing land and animals. And if we improve that, then hopefully we have less of these issues, which again, for the long term, would serve us a lot better.
Yeah, 100%. We can create healthier systems. We're building soil. We've got resilient animals, and a lot of it also, I really believe, comes down to fit for purpose animals. You can't take a pig that's been selectively bred to perform at a very high output level in a factory farm over the last 100 years and throw it in one of my paddocks and expect it to do well. It's going to shrivel up and die. It can't handle that pressure. And we actually saw that happen in COVID. We saw these big factory farms in America have to destock because the whole food supply crumbled, and the just-in-time logistics was every day there's millions of pigs ready to get slaughtered. The slaughterhouses can't accept them. There's piglets coming behind them. And so they did a couple things. I think I actually saw Anthony Chafee share this back when it happened. It could have been someone else, but they were gassing these pigs in the sheds, and they actually ran out of the gas to euthanize them. So they actually started blocking the vents and turning the heaters up and sweating them to death, boiling them. Essentially, absolutely horrible. There was video footage leaked of that, and that's just an absolutely revolting practice. But something else that happened was they were giving away the pink pigs to the homesteaders, and all the homesteaders and everyone thought this is great. And I watched all this happen. I thought, geez, these people are lucky. They're getting 40 free pigs. And then 2-3 weeks later, I saw all the posts on these pages and support groups. Everyone's like, my pigs are sick. They got sunstroke. They're getting sunburnt. They're all dopey and they can't. And these animals, when you've got a black pig next to it, doing absolutely fine. And that was really one of the things that got me started thinking about fit for purpose animals and how much of a role that really plays. You can't just take status quo animals and try to do out of the box or traditional sort of management with them. They really need to be hand in hand.
Yeah, and again, that's something that people don't think about and realize, especially if you've never managed animals. You could take the typical city dweller and throw them out in the outback. They probably wouldn't do so well either, right? So it's a simple paradigm with that. And so what are the particular?
That, you take a pale skinned redheaded Irish person from 400 years ago and drop them in Australia in a climate that's got indigenous people. They're just they're going to shrivel up. That's probably a great example of this swine comparison.
Yeah, simple.
We are all different species and different breeds within species are adapted for certain things. So for me, I had to learn that on my farm. My neighbours had goats, so I bought some of their goats. I thought I'll put some goats with my sheep. Absolutely horrible idea. Their feet all went soft, and I'm thinking. I said to the neighbours, do you have any issues with the feet? Oh, not really, but you've got to trim them. I said, why? They said, they get soft and soggy because we're on river flats. I said, how often do you trim them? They said, a dozen times a year. I'm thinking, This isn't the sort of work I want to do. I don't want to be stuck in the yards, trimming, injecting, drenching. I don't want to be pulling calves in the middle of winter. I don't want to be out in the pasture spraying herbicides. That's none of the fun stuff. I want to be collecting eggs, moving cows into new paddocks, doing head counts on new spring lambs. That's all the fun stuff that farming is, but we've created a job for ourselves as an industry, where we're so preoccupied doing all this damage control, nonsense maintenance. And the thing that really got me about goats is we've got these animals that can't do well on a river flats, but they actually thrive in the desert. Like, you put them in the desert where there's nothing, and they glow. And then in the desert, where, you know, we're in this marginal land, we're fighting tooth and nail to breed, you know, heat tolerant cattle, and which is, you know, something that I love. But it's like, you know, that's where the goats do really well. So, you know, I think sometimes we should adjust our eating patterns to represent, you know, what our environment's giving us.
Yeah, that's such an important part, is that for most of our history, what was available to us was only what was local, right? Mm-hmm. We weren't importing different breeds of species from all around the world and shipping them to areas where they were not indigenous. And now we have that all around the world. And that aspect ties into the food sovereignty thing too, right? So perfect example was during COVID, like you said, when there was mass issues, there was shortages, particularly in the US, both because their own stock they had issues with, but then I think also there was a major issue because a lot of the beef was being imported from South America or Central America, and then none of that was coming through. And so developing food sovereignty, and for those who are not familiar with that term, is, you know, as a nation, as a country, we want to make sure that we can supply and support our own population with our food. If we don't have food, that's going to be problematic, right? Lots of people potentially die. So it's really important to have that food sovereignty component to make sure we are supporting local farmers, local agriculture, so that we can have it here. And on that note, so what are the particular breeds that you have on your farm?
Sure. Well, with our pigs, we use a mix of Berkshire and Hampshire. We work with another farmer up at Cootamundra. His name's Jason Bates. Got a brilliant farm called Stock and Piggle, and he breeds the pigs for us, and we receive them from him. He's a pasture-based, you know, rotation system. Farrows all of his pigs down on pasture in these cool little huts, and he's quite a large operation he's got. And so we get weaner piglets from him at 8 weeks old, and they run out on pasture. They do a great job. With our sheep, we're sort of trying to develop our own animal at the moment, but we're using a female line of ewes called Damara. They're an African fat-tailed sheep, so they lose their hair. And if you look at their tail from the back, it's actually really broad, and it's got really fatty deposits. And the better body condition the sheep is, the fatter the tail gets.
Yeah, interesting.
And they're like, I like them because they're fertile, they're great mothers, and in our current marketplace, they're extremely cheap because they're prejudiced. They're the wrong shape. You know, their legs are too long and skinny, and their bodies are too small. And because they're brown and black and white and striped and spotted, the market respects them as zero, and that's a complete advantage to me with my operation trying to build numbers. So we're getting them, and then we are putting composite shedding rams over them, just sort of whatever. We're messing around with a few different breeds. We do want to put a little bit more carcass size on these animals, but you know, so again, we're using African genetics, and with our cattle, we're using an African breed called Nguni, which is spelled Nguni for anybody that wants to look into that. And they are just the most amazing breed of cattle. And I got involved with them probably 2.5, 3 years ago. Bought my first bull. Dr. Max Goldhain met a farmer at a farmer's market up north and got the Nguni seed planted at his head, and he sent me a message on Signal. Hey, have you heard of Nguni? And I Googled it. And I
I've seen him talking about that one. Yeah, he's a big fan, big fan.
Yeah, we're both mad into it. I stayed up all night researching it. I bought my first bull the next day, and up until that point, I wasn't even breeding. I was trading. So I bought a bull and got into breeding, and I've got a number of bulls now, and we're doing a lot of like crosses over different British breeds, trying to build numbers up because the animals are quite rare. So getting purebred animals is really hard. But they're a small framed, very hardy, very fertile, very long living animal. And again, they're completely rubbished in the marketplace. So to give you an idea, if I took a 18-month-old Angus ready to process and sold it to the marketplace today, I might get $1,800 for it. If I sent off an 18-month Nguni into the same auction alongside it, it might be fetching $600 or $700. And that's because it's the wrong color. It's probably got horns, which they don't like. And its frame size is wrong, you know, and they're a smaller animal, but I'm saying if we had like for like, similar weight, the prejudice, the discount would be 60-70%.
Yeah,
So
interesting. And that's just based on like the aesthetics of the animal, or is it also, potential yields and things like that?
no, it's got nothing to do with yield because the example I'm giving is trying to compare a like for like. The industry is just brainwashed. There is just this underlying, sort of dogmatic idealism that good cows are black and good sheep are white. And if you've got anything, so it does disregard my Nguni, Herefords, which are a black and white British cattle, which have been in Australia getting farmed as long as Shorthorns and as long as Angus, yeah, Herefords are going to be at a discount compared to an Angus in the sale yards. And a lot of this comes back to a brilliant marketing job by the Angus Association, and the McDonald's have the Angus written on the board and all this sort of thing. But I completely relish the fact that our direct-to-consumer model frees us of all those market-based shackles, and we can go along and go, what's the best animal for the job? Like, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to have efficient, high welfare, unmedicated, fit-for-purpose cattle. Now, our area where we are in Australia, everyone's farming British animals. We've got Aberdeen Angus, we've got Herefords, we've got Shorthorns, we've got all these wool sheep. All of these hail back to Europe and England. Our climate here is a lot more similar to Africa than it is England. We're in
Yeah.
English houses with English animals, and it just makes no sense. So,
Yeah.
Australia's a diverse continent. We've got a lot of different zones, but I really think that these African genetics have so much to offer, especially for our long, hot summers. They're talking about England's got a heat wave at the moment, 26 degrees Celsius. I've been outside moving cattle when it's been 45 degrees.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of a different climate.
An animal that's adapted to 26 degrees being a heat wave and put them in our paddocks? It just makes no sense.
And how come this has become so deep ingrained, and how do we shift, the industry towards things that are going to be more sustainable and that do match the climate more?
Well, there are a lot of things you can do on your farm to mitigate that. So farmers have shade and water, and over the years, just because we've taken British genetics here doesn't mean that the animals are exactly the same. So, farmers are smart, and they'll see a heat-stressed animal and understand that it's not going to pay the money. So over the last 150 years of whatever sort of conventional farming, they've been selecting for animals that can do a little bit better with the heat. And so the British animals we have here, I don't want to completely, botch the premise. They are a bit better suited here than what it probably originally came. But my whole thing is, if you take an Nguni or a Mashona, first generation out of Africa, and plop it here without 150 years worth of work by Aussie farmers, it's better in the first generation than all the work we've been able to do in terms of those sorts of things like dry feed utilization and heat tolerance. So, the only way that we're going to be able to breed back to those things that I can see at the moment is little fledgling, startups like myself that are having these conversations and attracting consumers who go, you know what, I would rather eat beef from an Nguni that's been comfortable in its environment its whole life over a Wagyu that was on pasture for a year and then spent 8 months in a feedlot eating ad lib grain and, waddling around like a morbidly obese person on the beach. And you can go on PubMed and type in, grain feeding cattle insulin, and it talks about how they have insulin responses immediately. Their blood sugar spikes immediately, and we're essentially worshipping these diabetic cows with all this intramuscular fat and all of this all through all the organs and everything. When what we really probably want is a leaner red meat. The red meat that nutrient benchmarks the best all the time is your elk and your venison, and there's hardly any marbling. It's a nice, when it's in good condition, it's a nice thick fat cap. So you think about your porterhouse, you've got your nice big rind of fat on the top and a lean piece of meat. And so, the Ngunis we're breeding don't look good. Well, I think it looks great, but, I'm a bit biased, and I've sort of, you come to appreciate, what you've come to appreciate. But it to a customer who's used to Wagyu being the premium, if you put one of my Nguni steaks next to it, it's a bit of a laugh.
Yeah.
But, and I've always understood fat to be flavor, even before we became fat advocates. And I still do believe fat is flavor. But I ate some bull. We processed some yearling bull the other week for a local farmer, and there was no fat at all because this animal's filling up with testosterone, putting on muscle, and all its female counterparts are getting fat. and getting ready to breed and support gestation and lactation. And the boys are just putting on bulk, and it was very, very lean, no fat on it at all. And the flavor was huge. Like, it had a lot of like really nice flavor. So I do push fat is flavor, but I'm even sort of starting to challenge my own premise, because we're starting to process a lot of these animals that fit outside. Like, we talk about color orthodoxy and species orthodoxy. I'm also starting to process and direct market mutton, which is old sheep, ram, which is male sheep uncastrated. We're doing bulls, we're doing culled cows, all these animals that don't fit inside this orthodoxy, because how long's it been since we've been eating? Every piece of steak we've had in our mouth has been from an 18-month-old steer. Like, it just,
it's very unnatural.
As a historical timeline, it's a slither. So we're sort of trying to broaden our horizons and educate ourselves, and we're learning so much. It's such an interesting journey to be on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it ties into that sort of nose to tail eating too, but you can sort of broaden that much wider to, multi-species eating. It's not like we just ate steak all the time. It was always a porterhouse or, a Scotch. That's all people eat. We need to start broadening the food that we're consuming, because really, again, when we're talking sustainability, we always consumed everything that we had. And again, it was whatever animal was available. So sheep, cattle, whatever was there, we ate all of those. That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear. And I think what you outlined with the direct-to-consumer approach now, there's farmers like yourself, and there's a few other smaller ones and startups that are sort of broadening this field quite a lot. And I think it's enabled the market to grow more. And maybe you know this better than myself, but I feel like that shift is happening. And I think the popularity of, your brand and your company and many others hopefully supports that. I feel people are starting to wake up to the idea that, the steak shouldn't look like a marbled piece of a cut. It should be more lean. It should be grass-fed, grass-finished. Should be coming from places that are practicing these proper land management and healthy animal welfare.
We try not to market on taste. It's so subjective, and it doesn't align with any of our values. Prioritizing the taste. So we want our food to taste good, because I can sell somebody our food based on our values for the first box, but if they don't like eating it, they're not going to reorder it. But I don't market on taste, and I don't really ask for taste feedback, because the second order is that feedback, and we get, our follow through order rate is exceptionally high. But I don't want to get stuck in talking about taste. But me personally, the bully beef, the ram, the culled cow, everything where I haven't processed anything outside of that normal paradigm that's offended me. It's always been good. And so I just look at, as an industry on the whole, we are leaving a lot of value on the table. Like you go over to Europe, and you go to these culinary crown jewels of the world, in the mountains in Spain, and, in the Pyrenees, and France and Italy. And the old cow is revered. Like, the older the beef, the better. And here, when I put on Facebook that I have old cow, the first thing that happens is it sells out. And the second thing that happens is all the other farmers and butchers that follow me start making fun of me, because they're still stuck in that paradigm. It doesn't matter how many good reviews I post of people that are wanting more Jersey beef or more because they love it so much that you can't sort of get other people to break out of these paradigms.
Yeah. Well, I think the market will speak for itself, right? And hopefully that's going to be the thing that starts to shift it. And like I said, I think we are starting to see that, and people are becoming more aware of their sourcing and thinking about that more than, as you said, just taste alone, or some of the preconceived notions around, what beef is supposed to look like. That's great. I'm sure we could go plenty more into each of those, but I did want to touch on the community aspect and sort of get a bit of your information on, your operations and how that all ties into what you're doing. So maybe if you could open up a little bit more about the community side, how you're supporting the community, and then we'll see where we go with that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think just being transparent on social media, just for a beginning, it is a 24/7 window into our business. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We do a mailing list. We've got all these different touch points with people. And I really earnestly try to show the good and the bad, the wins and the losses. And I just think that honesty and that sort of genuine nature with customers does build a bit of a community. If I get the vegan trolls landing on the page or whatever it is, I very rarely step in to defend myself. One, because it's not something I'm too interested into, but all my community rallies, and a lot of these people are people I've never met. You know, they follow me on socials, they order the boxes, or they live abroad and they think what we're doing is interesting. And so, you know, this space that talks about community, regen, ag, and their version of community is the farmers market. And, you know, Don't get me wrong, a farmers market's great, but 2024, we are a virtual global world, and your community, if I was dogmatic about my community just being my postcode, you know, there'd be 14 of us. There'd be 14 Bitcoin raw milk loving homeschoolers, and, you know, and we'd be capped, and all the value that we had to offer would be suffocated from the progress of the market at large. So I'm really passionate about it, you know, being a bit more global. Why not? And then, so we do things like school tours on our farm. Now, you know, to be transparent, I haven't done anything for almost 6 months because we've just moved farm. We've always leased land and we lived in town, but we bought a farm and we moved out there December, and my wife snapped her Achilles and we had a baby. And it's been a bit of a process getting all that
few things
farm
going
set
on.
up. So we are aiming to get our new property, all the systems and all the animals there are ready for spring. We're going to do a big spring fair. We do a big spring fair every year. The last time we did one, it was, you know, 500 people, and we had cars parked on the side of the street out of sight. All the neighbours driving through the farm would have been like, "What is going on here?" You know, we had egg and spoon race and bobbing apples for the kids. We tried to make it like an old school country fair. But we do the open farms. We do farm tours monthly when we're in the swing of things. We open it up to school groups to come out. I guess special interest groups, like I'll have groups of doctors or groups of nutritionists or groups of chefs that'll approach me. I've had some professional athletes approach me about bringing their, you know, footy team or whatever else out. So, you know, love having that opportunity. I don't get heaps of sales out of it. We don't make heaps of money doing it. We do charge for tours for different groups depending on who they are. But, you know, if I can just drop one or two truth bombs into one or two people in the crowd, the knock-on effect, you know, some of the serendipity that's happened for me in our food journey has been like our very first spring fair. There was a gentleman there wearing a Bitcoin hat, and I started talking to him because it was just when I was starting to get into Bitcoin, and it just so happened that he owned 100 acres 10 minutes around the corner, and finding land to lease is very difficult, and he offered it to me. And that was serendipity. I had a free farm tour, turn up, come around, let's have a bit of fun, sausages in bread for the kids. And, you know, we hit it off, and you don't get that unless you sort of open yourself up and put yourself out there. So true. You know, that's all part of it of our community thing as well. And I've just started working with the local agri-tourism department for the shire that we live in, trying to see how we can help put our area on the map, because our region has a lot to offer. And this is something, Richard, that, you know I offend a lot of farmers, and it's not, I don't do it on purpose. Like when I made one of the very first comments I made to you was I couldn't find the food I wanted, so I thought I'd grow it myself. Now think about, you're a third generation Australian farmer, and some kid who's never farmed before said, no one in Australia makes food worthy for my body, my temple of a body. So me with no experience and hardly any resources and whatever, I'm going to grow the best food in the country. Now, I know that sounds really arrogant, and at the time it probably was, but what it actually is it's a reflection on the industry's market access issues. See, since I've got into the industry and I'm starting to attract a lot of farmers and make some great friends, I am consistently blown away with the high caliber of grass-fed and finished quasi-organic farmers out there producing at scale. I just chatted to a lady the other day. She runs like 1,000 cow mob, and she does mixed farming. So she a little bit of cropping and a few sheep as well. And she's completely chemical-free and completely grass-fed and finished. And she sells all of her protein in the commodity markets because there's no market access vehicle for her products. So I'm thinking, if I could have found you, I would have never had to have started farming. I could still be selling pushies. Now I'm glad I'm farming. I'd rather be doing this than selling push bikes and lattes, which I still do, mind you. But it's a market access issue. So, you know, part of our community reach is acknowledging that Wolki Farm isn't a farm business. I'm more looking at us now. I don't think we're a butchery business either. I think we're more a in the space of a technology startup business, and changing the phrasing of that is helping me understand where to put my time. The real issues, I don't need to reinvent beef farming because all the best guys out there are already doing that, and I stole their models, the holistic plan grazing and all this stuff. Like I was an early adopter. I wasn't an innovator, but the market access is cooked. So
Yeah.
what we're trying to bring in is what our skill set is, which is maybe sales and logistics a little bit more. And so if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have been dogmatic that every cut of meat and every product that goes through our website will be 100% raised by us. And that's not the case anymore. We work with a lot of brilliant producers because they passed the litmus test that I would feed their food to my children. And so we're willing to open up our sales channels, 1, so we can keep up, but 2, so we can give them market access, and 3, the people that need the food can actually access it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a major issue. And I think the community side ties into it. And like you said, in the digital space now, that's especially important. And I'm sure over the last couple of generations, there's been a market decrease in the amount of people that are maintaining farms. Family farms are shrinking every day now. It's just large corporate farms. And so I think we need more people that are doing what you're doing to bring more awareness and more respect to the whole industry and sharing that more and more, but also making it hopefully more accessible, more profitable, and just overall a big improvement in the whole industry. Because there is, in the status quo right now, there's a lot of anti-meat rhetoric that's going around. I think Australia is still quite good for that. There's good support for farmers here, but you look at what's happening in Germany and in parts of Europe, in America, there's a sort of an attack almost against any animal-based agriculture now. And so I think it's important to keep building out community and building out this model more and more, which is fantastic that you're doing. I think it's quite revolutionary, and leveraging the things that you are leveraging is great. The community part, I really like, and especially, what you've done in the past with bringing on schools and bringing kids on, because there is that aspect of farms shrinking and there's less people doing that. And I think in the modern day, people don't understand or respect to the degree that they should agriculture and our farmers and what they're doing. And hopefully what you're doing in this space now is going to entice more people to go back to that way of life. And things like homeschooling, homesteading, going back to the farms, those hopefully are growing more and more. I think we're seeing that shift. So it's fantastic. And I'm very happy that you are pushing those types of things forward.
Well, that's part of our mission. It's what we're here to do, and we want to eat good food. Let's go.
That's right. I think that's the big difference, right? Is you have very clear, you outlined at the beginning your decision-making frameworks, which is great, but you have very clear values that shape what you want to do. And I think that's a really important component. And it's maybe where a lot of the conventional industry maybe has gone awry. They're more sort of protecting their ego, protecting the status quo, and trying to maintain their positions, opposed to supporting people who are trying to innovate, who are trying to do something new and bring new things to the space.
It's very easy to become desensitized to things when you do them all the time. So, if you grew up and grandpa plowed and then dad plowed, and it's very easy to never think about the effect of plowing. Same for throwing around chemical. Same for mulesing sheep. Our merino sheep, which Australia is so well known for, have been bred to have a very skin with a lot of surface area. So it's got a lot of creases and folds in it. And in summer, when they've got all these creases and folds around their rear end, and they're weeing and pooing, and all the wool's growing nice and thick, it gets damp in there, and flies will come in and lay their maggots in there, and then the maggots will actually, it's called fly strike, they'll actually eat this animal from the inside out, and it's the most horrific, relatively slow, painful death. So the farmers came up with an idea that they could cut that skin off with a big pair of sort of precision-made scissors, which is quite horrific in its own right. You just take a pair of scissors to this animal's foldy skin, which you made it have in the first place. So the welfare was up front was really poor, but long term, the animal didn't die of fly strike, right? So pat on your back, we've done a good job. Well, there's farmers out there that have bred merinos. They're called SRS, soft rolling skin merinos. It's a different genetic, and they can grow lots of fine micron wool without needing to be mulesed. So all of a sudden, we've made a few adjustments using our brains and challenging paradigms and going, this animal's now fit for purpose. And so it's easy to never question the orthodoxy, because you grow up in it. There's bigger fish to fry, right? But I think about this with abattoirs. Everybody likes to pick on the abattoirs. There's always a video being leaked. There's always an expose about somebody doing something that's a little bit untoward towards animals, or cruel, or distasteful. And I don't advocate for any of that. Like, I would love animals to be treated with respect for their whole lives, especially the end of it. But at the same time, we've outsourced all of our slaughter to a very few amount of people, and their coping mechanism, for lack of a different thing, would to be to make them to become desensitized. So what do you sort of expect? You know, it wasn't long ago that me, Jacob, with my family of 5, would probably personally kill and butcher 1 cow a year, and 2 pigs, and 20 chickens, and half a dozen lambs, or whatever it was, and that would be what we would eat. And I'd have the blood on my hands of those few animals. And when I did it, it'd probably be a little bit of a moment, and I'd take a breath before I pulled the trigger, because you're understanding the sacrifice these animals and the provisions that they're giving us. And it's a beautiful, spiritual, holistic, earthy thing to do. You give a guy a knife and you go, 2,000 sheep today, thank you very much. You know, how do we get surprised when they're desensitized to it? So I'm trying to tie this all back into the commodity. You know, how do we change it? Well, you don't. I've never heard about a farmer going regen without their own farm health journey, watching the dust blow away, watching the drought ruin them, watching all the animals get sick, watching the finances collapse. You know, all the Gabe Browns, the Colin Seiss, the Alan Savory, all these titans of our movement have got these horrific stories of when their families, or when their farms fell apart. So we got to this space because of a food healing journey for our body. They got to regenerative agriculture for a farm healing journey for their land. And so I don't think you can really challenge that orthodoxy and reach people until they have their own crisis point, especially because it's a roadless challenge and it's very hard. So if you want to take a guy who's got 5,000 acres selling wheat and take him off a commodity market system, this stuff that he grows, which is going to be different now, like where does he sell it?
Yeah.
You know, so that's why people like me, I think not everybody needs to be the Joel Salatin, got the chickens, the cows, the pigs, the lambs, and does the whole thing and sells at the farmer's market, the farm gate. We need more people who are willing to start to set up supply chains, independent markets, and build that framework to support the farmers that are making those transitions and doing a good job.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's a great summary of what the industry needs to do and where we need to be moving. And hopefully, you know, we sort of make that shift and we start to use our brains before we have a moment where it's too late. I think that shift is happening and should continue to happen for sure. Well, as we sort of wrap up, that was probably a good summary towards the end there, but any sort of last minute words of wisdom to, you know, either people who are considering maybe moving into this space, whether it's, you know, maybe starting homesteading, maybe they're considering farming, maybe they're looking to transition to regen ag, any words of wisdom for them?
Well, look, if you want to get into farming or homesteading and you don't have an agricultural background, the best thing you can do is find a farm and volunteer yourself for a few weekends and actually get some hands-on experience. Most farmers that are in our space will welcome you onto the farm. They'll probably give you a bit of meat or, you know, give you a hot cooked meal. But it'll be like doing a crash course apprenticeship. Having hands-on experience will save you so much heartache and learn on the job sort of mistakes later on. If you're wanting to make a transition, I would just try to surround yourself with farmers that have done and are doing that too. There's heaps of groups on all the different platforms, and then even if you're not an online sort of person, there's local grazing groups, and go to a Alan Savory holistic management course and you'll be there. It's a week-long course. It's a brilliant course. You'll be there with 30, 40, 50 other farmers all on that same journey with you. You know, there's a lot of access. Me, I don't practice what I preach in a lot of those regards. I like to learn by doing and
figure it out.
Hard mistakes. Yeah, and I do.
Yeah.
I always you know, if there's a good deal on 200 sheep and I don't have land for 200 sheep, I just buy the sheep and worry about the land later. So I create myself a lot of headaches, but it's sort of our style at the same time. And I've just come to accept that that's the way my life is.
Well, it's a sure way of learning things very quickly, right?
So you get good at solving problems.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, fantastic. Jake, really appreciate all your insights. And I'll some of the things that you mentioned there, like Savory Institute and some of the courses, I can definitely link for people who are interested in Joe Salatin and some of the books he's written. So I'll put those in for people if they want to dive into those more. If people want to sort of follow you, connect with you, is there anywhere they can? I know also the Regenerate Summit is coming up, and I think this should go live before the upcoming one in August as well, if you want to share that with people.
It's August 3rd, 4th here at Splitters Creek, just near Albury Wodonga. So it's a 2-day event, which we've got a heap of holistic thinkers, doctors and farmers and agronomists and all sorts of things coming to that one. If people want to follow our journey, you can go to wolkifarm.com.au and sign up to our mailing list. That's where our food's available too. We ship to 10,000 suburbs across Australia every week. I'm on Facebook as Wolki Farm. And if you want to get all the spicy takes, I'm on X at Jake Wolki. And that's where I really speak my mind, because that's where my parents don't follow me.
Yeah, that's a platform for it. It's also the crypto-centric platform. So maybe we'll have to catch up and chat crypto, because I've been in that space for quite some time now, and I'm a big sort of decentralized network in general principal follower. So can definitely chat more about that.
Love it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jake. Appreciate it, and look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you made it all the way to the end, that's great. Please support our channel by liking and subscribing, as that really helps us out. And remember, you can get an extra 10% off all our products by using the discount code SOURCE10 at checkout. Thanks, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.